evening and welcome again to another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and our objective is always to have an engaging, interactive and civil discourse, and in so doing help develop a culture of peace and understanding through citizens' participation and yes, through dialogue. Our guests are persons who express views, opinions, and perspectives of their own. Sometimes may not necessarily be that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. Our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground on differing views, irrespective of where we are and irrespective of what our beliefs might be. Now, it's been described in some quarters as the Riot Act being read to public sector workers, more specifically government-paid workers. It came on Saturday, and perhaps not by surprise, when the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, said as of mid-January 2022, all government-paid workers must be fully vaccinated or must show proof of their status, failing which they run the risk of losing benefits or, more directly, not being paid. And though many knew that the announcement was coming, as this has since created much disquiet, especially among the unvaccinated persons in Trinidad and Tobago, persons who say they reserve the right to self-determination. But the issue is really about the worker and the employee, or worker and employer. While government remains the largest employer, the collective trade union body in Trinidad and Tobago also remains the largest worker representative body, and that's collectively. The road ahead and the social implications for all are certainly cause for concern when one considers not just social stability, but national development. Well, this evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, our topic, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. And to help discuss the issue, I have with me a representative from one of the leading trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago, General Secretary, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Trevor Johnson. And later on in the second half hour of the program, we will also revisit an earlier interview we did with the Employers Consultative Association on the same topic. We spoke then with Mr. Kenton Nancoo, Chairman of the ECA, and CEO Ms. Stephanie Fingal, both on their perspectives, all in the second half hour of the Citizens Community Forum this evening. But first, let me welcome again to the Citizens Community Forum Mr. Trevor Johnson of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Mr. Johnson, good evening to you and welcome.
Good evening to you, Mr. Cummings, and a pleasure to be here as always.
Yes, and I know it's not the first time, so that you need not necessarily, we need not go into much of an introduction. You're one of our staples here on the Citizens Community Forum. But, importantly, there are some important matters we wanted to address in this first half hour, Mr. Johnson. And I know that, it's been tugging at the hearts of not just, the trade union movement, but public sector workers and, by extension, the larger community. Mr. Johnson, the Riot Act has been read. We all heard it, vaccinate or else, from the trade union perspective. And where does your union stand in relation to what the Prime Minister would have said on Saturday? I want to start, by getting a perspective from you and your union.
Certainly, Mr. Cummings, and just to indicate, perhaps the statement by the Prime Minister was not a total surprise, because he would have sort of signaled that about 3 weeks ago when he did an address to the nation. So he was sort of signaling where he was going. But there are some serious implications in terms of the announcement that have been made. We are in what we might call in this country unexplored territory.
Uncharted waters, yes.
Uncharted waters. The COVID-19 itself has been described as unprecedented. And now we see the actions of the government led by the Prime Minister also leading us into uncharted waters, as you would call it. Certainly my own union, we would have a concern, because whilst we do not represent workers in the government service, we do represent, of course, workers in the what we might call the public sector. Those
Yes.
are state entities, and clearly the signal from the Prime Minister indicates they are going to be affected as well.
Yes,
So
he
are
did.
we? Oh,
Yes, he did
yes.
make mention that the mandate would also, demand that state enterprises be, come under that fold as well.
Yes, so that is of concern to us because we certainly represent possibly at least a dozen, just off the top of my head, at least a dozen areas where we have recognized majority status in the public sector, and we are looking at this very closely. The joint trade union movement would have had an emergency meeting this morning. My union is a affiliate of the joint trade union movement, and I'm sure you're aware there would have been a press conference earlier today,
Yes.
uh, which would have been articulated in the main by Comrade Ansel Roger, the president of the joint trade union movement. So our position and concerns haven't really changed in terms of our position on what is referred to as mandatory vaccinations. In that, first of all, to start off, let me just make this statement, as was done this morning. We are not against the vaccination as a voluntary process. In fact, we strongly encourage all of our members to get vaccinated as we follow the science. Not because we believe the vaccine is a cure, but it has clearly been shown that it can mitigate and give one an extra layer of protection in the event, unfortunately. So there's no issue with that.
Mm.
We have always, however, articulated, just like the trade union movement on the whole, that what we are against is either what we might call forced or mandatory.
Mandatory. Yes.
Yeah,
Vaccinate.
because the reality is, Mr. Cummings, is that there are workers, they may be in the minority, but there are workers who, for one reason or another, religious, medical reasons, and some workers and some citizens of this country simply have what they might call personal moral
Mm.
or personal beliefs, may not even be called religious beliefs, but certain beliefs by which they hold
Nearly two.
strong
Yes. Yes. Yes.
nearly to. And for those reasons, we feel that the issue of choice must remain, and therefore for the government to come and mandate that basically if you don't work, if you're not vaccinated, you cannot work, and if you don't work, of course, you don't get paid, is essentially basically a retrenchment.
All right.
Those workers who do not or are not able to be vaccinated certainly face the risk of, even though the Prime Minister have said you will have a job, you'll be furloughed, which is in a sense
Yes.
a term
I was
we
just
didn't.
yes, I was just about to make mention of that. I mean, I understand the meaning of the word, but I haven't heard the word for quite some time. I guess there wasn't, an environment that created, the use of that term. But certainly, we just, before we continue, we'd just like to remind our listeners and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening: job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. I have with me a representative from one of the leading trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Trevor Johnson. Mr. Johnson, is this a perfect cocktail for further instability and social upheaval in Trinidad and Tobago in an already tense industrial relations climate? We know what has been happening in terms of the history with workers' benefits. We've been talking about so many unsettled matters, industrial relation matters. Is this a perfect cocktail for further instability if not handled properly?
Yes, well, Mr. Cummings, it certainly has the potential for that. We would certainly hope, as citizens of this beloved country, that that does not occur. But if one looks for example, what has been happening in some other jurisdictions or some other parts of the world, in France, in Belgium, in Germany, etc., just to name a few, in Spain, etc., you will see where they hold dearly, some may say more dearly than for what they call their rights and their freedoms and their liberties.
Yeah, rights to self-determination, yes.
Right, and they have been on the street in mass numbers. I mean, thousands. You have seen people being arrested, people, being, pepper spray and so forth. So that clearly, in some jurisdictions, you are seeing that people are taking this matter their
To the
rights,
next level, yes.
what they perceive to be the taking away of their rights, to be a very serious thing, and they therefore are going on the street. So when you talk about the issue of is it a perfect cocktail of some sort of industrial unrest, etc. Comrade Ansel Roger did emphasize this morning that the trade union movement wants to operate in terms of doing everything that is legally possible.
Yeah.
So we are not looking to create some kind of upheaval, but we will certainly, if it is necessary, register in the strongest possible way our disapproval of the government's actions, because one, it is considered illegal because they have not had any dialogue before that, prior to that announcement. If this is an employee issue, as you indicated earlier, then there was an obligation on the part of the government to have dialogue with the social partners, with the trade unions, especially.
In keeping with what you would say in good industrial relations.
Good industrial relations, so that we should not be hearing it as an announcement, as a public announcement, like the rest of the the population. There should have been some prior. Whether we agree or disagree, the fact is government had an obligation.
Well, that's what I'm hearing.
More.
Yes, well, that's what I'm hearing from the trade unions. And, I've been looking even before this announcement that came on Saturday. There was a report that came out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Johnson, where teachers were sent home because of an issue. Some teachers felt that they did not want to have that issue of vaccination forced upon them, and by extension the government started to move to have them I don't know what you want to call it, if it's retrenched or followed, whatever, but certainly we've been seeing a similar type of thing happening around the world. And I just referenced St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think I saw another report where was it in France somewhere, where workers were simply told, if you are not vaccinated, go home. So is it that we've been seeing a new trend developing, something that we in Trinidad and Tobago possibly have been following? There's a saying here in Trinidad and Tobago that whenever the US or wherever catches a cold, we tend to be the ones to sneeze. Is it that we are not looking at how we treat with our own peculiarities in Trinidad and Tobago, and we tend to be mirroring that which we see in other countries, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, Mr. Cummings, it certainly appears like that. As you said, yes, there have been issues in several other countries. St. Vincent, I would have read the report on the weekend where teachers were sent home. In their case, even though some of the teachers would have worked for the period or part of the period, they were told once you did not adhere to this part of what was now considered a condition, then you would not receive pay.
Yes.
And it's very important to understand a couple things here. One, the Prime Minister has given about maybe a week, 10 days notice. And he has come, this is the week before Christmas, when people are as culturally
I was coming to
engaged,
that, but go ahead. I will allow you to develop that point. Yeah.
culturally and spiritually, etc. For the, people are engaged in organizing their families towards the Christmas season. For some, it's a strongly spiritual event. For others, it's a family time, etc. For others, it's a time of fun with parang, etc. And after what could be considered an extremely challenging year, we are coming to the last last 2 weeks of the year, and this bombshell is dropped in the middle of people's, preparation. And you drop this bombshell where people now have to consider, well, I I either work or I don't get paid, or I get vaccinated or I don't get paid. So it's going to be, it's not just a workplace interruption, it's an interruption of the social fabric and the family engagement at this time of the year. So I would say it is also more than a bit insensitive for this announcement to come at this critical juncture. My union acknowledge and the trade union movement acknowledge that we are not denying that COVID-19 is a very serious issue. People are dying. Just today, there was a announcement of number of deaths.
Yes. And the numbers, yeah, the numbers have been, very, very high and continue to.
So we are not naive to that. It is a serious situation, which is why it requires dialogue, social dialogue. Very important because
go ahead.
the government has shown clearly by themselves, whilst they have had maybe good intentions, it might be, but if they're not careful, this situation can get away from them. And therefore, it requires social dialogue. You need to speak to business, you need to speak to labor, you need to speak to the religious community, because clearly by themselves, this situation may be getting away from them. And they cannot go about just taking decisions without engaging the totality of society, civil society, etc., in terms of how do we move forward. They cannot wait until we have a total crisis before they begin to say, look, we need to talk about this. And that is a very key issue in going forward. That dialogue needs to start like yesterday, like last week.
All right.
It needs to be engaged now.
Right. Now, I heard the issue of whether this was the right timing, to create such an environment. So is it that we are also seeing, I mean, this is, some people might describe it as creating a social pandemic within a pandemic, Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the, what we've been experiencing. And obviously, and that's why I referenced the issue of that cocktail, whether we are creating that kind of environment, in this not having this strong spirit of dialogue and being able to come to the table and have discussion as to where we can get the solutions, how we can get the mechanisms right. But certainly, Mr. Johnson, when we talk about the balancing of rights, and how can we before I go into that, there's a point I wanted to bring to you, but before I go into that, the Prime Minister did mention, though, that this is not what some people are making it out to be, mandatory vaccination. He's saying that what appears to, or what is being done, is the creation of a term that we've been hearing as well, safe zones. Is it a safe zone initiative, or is it mandatory, the creation of a mandatory system for vaccination? How do you view that, really? I'm a bit, not too clear on from what I'm hearing.
It's really, in my view, a matter of playing with words or semantics, because you are, in fact, saying to people, vaccinate or else. And when that or else means that their job, their property, their job is their property, their means of a livelihood by which they have to earn a livelihood. I don't see it being just a matter of creating safe zones. To the trade union movement, you are engaged in a retrenchment exercise, because you are, without dialogue, without engaging the representative recognized majority union for each of the areas that we are talking about. You are saying to people, I'm telling you, either you vaccinate or effectively you do not get paid. So even if you have a job, and if we take it as what has happened in some other jurisdictions, one Prime Minister stretched it to say, you do not get paid, but if you do not work long enough, you will lose your job, and that is eventually what could happen. So you may not be paid for a month or three. Suppose it stretches out, then we may then face a situation where the government now says, okay, you have been home 3 months and you haven't reported to work. So that is the next step. In industrial relations, unions are not naive to this. The government will move to a next step soon enough. It's just a matter of being done in installments. So we cannot be fooled by any statement that by the Prime Minister, or as I heard the Minister of Health this afternoon say, the government has not engaged in mandatory vaccination.
Okay.
But then they have also said we are coming to Parliament in January to pass legislation to address this. So that signals, all of those things put together signals to us that they are putting a legal tenet to this to support whatever their actions are, and to the public service or the public sector worker. This is a clear and present threat and a clear and present danger, which in effect have become reality.
All right, and this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, our topic this evening, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. I have with me a representative of from one of the leading trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Trevor Johnson. Mr. Johnson, we talk about the balancing of rights. How can we effectively engage such a process when you have a strong case on both sides, of self-determination? So you have, the workers' rights and you have the employer rights. That seems to be, the crux of the matter. It drives to the very, kind of instability, the dispute that we've been having as to who has a greater right. I think we need to probably look at that in a sense where we can come to some sort, and again maybe this is where the social dialogue comes in that you've been talking about.
Yes, Mr. Cummings, and I need to remind that Trinidad and Tobago is a member state of the International Labour Organization. And the position of the labor organization is clearly one that is concerned about the numbers of people globally who have lost their jobs as a result of not just those who have died or who have contracted COVID-19, but those who have also lost their jobs. I mean, ranging, I think, up to 200 million plus.
Yes.
And ILO's position is clearly one that endorses social dialogue as an objective that should be that one should move towards, so that the partners can come together and look at solutions. ILO's position clearly is one where we can see how we can look at the position of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, because there's the science to look at that. Can people who are unvaccinated continue to operate in the workplace? Remember, up to now in the public service, you have vaccinated and you have unvaccinated.
Yes.
And I don't know that there has been a major crisis. One of the things we continue to mandate in the trade union movement, and we are very strong on it, and the science supports it, is the adherence to all the public health protocols: wash your hands, masking, social distancing, etc., sanitizing, etc., because what the science have also shown in the minority up to now is that you can be vaccinated, and you can, if you are careless or,
or irresponsible,
you may inadvertently not responsible, you can contract COVID-19, or you can also inadvertently spread it. Because up to this evening, there's a 5th case of the Omicron virus where there's no travel history, and someone has got it. Clearly, there's more investigation to be done. It means that they have contracted it somehow, possibly from someone who has traveled and whom the health, who have evaded, not necessarily deliberately, but who has not come under the scrutiny of the health system as yet, maybe an asymptomatic individual. So we need to look at, and the trade union movement did provide the I think it was the ECA where you mentioned, you had them several weeks ago with workplace protocols as to how, when we were in early discussions about how can you work with the vaccinated and the unvaccinated.
Yes.
We provided them with extensive documentation in terms of protocols in the workplace, so that once these are followed, whether you are vaccinated or you are unvaccinated, then if you follow these protocols, then it should certainly mitigate the challenges of the chances of any outbreak or any
Yes, I'm hearing also, Mr. Johnson, that there are going to be probably some new provisions, legal provisions that would sort of extend to the COVID-19, virus. Now, previously, as it stands now, we don't have, those laws and those regulations that, that states, well, this is what an employer can do if a person is suspected to be infected or so that there's no legal provision now as we speak, but certainly there is the intent of the government by way of legal, and I think this would come under what they say is the Parent Act of the
Mhm.
of the health, Ministry of Health regulations. And again, it goes to even it extends to health and safety in the workplace. And I'm wondering, have the unions been talking and collaborating as well with other bodies outside of the of central government, like for example, OSHA. Um, you mentioned, the ILO, which is kind of, a little outside of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of their how they see things internationally. But I'm talking about local bodies. Has there been any sort of collaborative, working together on this same business of employer-worker relations as we look at job security in a pandemic in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, well, one such committee I'd certainly like to draw your attention to is which is a tripartite committee, the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee.
Hmm.
So it comprises government officials, it comprises representatives of business and representatives of labor. So this is a national committee, and they would have met sometime in the early part of this year. And there's now actually a proposal before cabinet from this tripartite committee comprising of government officials, which is before cabinet as we speak, which the government has not yet pronounced on, even though the work of this committee and its recommendations are before the government. And as I understand it, the strong recommendation of this committee is against mandatory work-based vaccinations.
Okay.
So the government has set up a committee or is part of a committee. They have, and of course, they would have, of course, the report isn't public
Hmm.
because it's for cabinet, but Labour does have representatives on the committee,
Okay.
hence we are aware.
But
So there's clearly a tripartite engagement which would have met, which would have looked at things, which would have made recommendations. And the government, just as it did with pandemic leave, you would call a recommendation went from the National Tripartite Advisory Council, and the government basically shuttled that particular recommendation. And here again, we have a second occasion when the government is coming with a proposal from a national committee and is bypassing the recommendations of that committee and engaging with its own action. So that is cause for concern as well.
right, cause for concern. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, our topic this evening, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. I have with me Mr. Trevor Johnson, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Mr. Johnson, we have just a few minutes again before we close the program. And I wanted to, in the closing moments of you talking with us in this first half hour, where do you see us going from here? This seems, as I said, I referenced, this what appears to be the creation of instability. It has the potential, if not handled properly. Where do you believe, we can probably, apart from just, we've been talking, and there's been recommendation, after recommendation as to what should be the model, how we should be going forward. Is there anything outside of what we have not done or we are not doing that you believe can sort of cool the tempers somewhat? It is a very, as I said, even before the pandemic, we've had issues, we've had industrial relation issues, as I said, when it's not teachers, sanitation workers, non-sanitation workers, bank workers. What else can be done to help, cool the tempers somewhat? What are some of your recommendations as we close the interview?
Yeah, well, the principal recommendation in these things globally and has been proven to work in all jurisdictions is some kind of dialogue, whether we call it social dialogue, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you have war, for the war to end, the parties have to stop firing at each other and come together and talk, have some sort of treaty of sort, whether we call it a peace treaty, etc. At the end of the day, you always require some kind of dialogue. We talk about tripartite dialogue. Maybe we need to expand that. I referenced earlier a wider civil society engagement, engagement with the religious bodies that we can, because they have members. Our members are also members of many religious bodies. Our members are also members of civil society groups, etc. And they want to have their voices heard.
Certainly.
So as I said, this thing is serious. It's not, we are not denying that there's a serious crisis, which is why you need a national engagement. Because when people think that they are not being listened to, we had an event recently in Tobago which represented, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but
We leave that for another program. Yes.
Yeah, you can see, but the one point I'm making of that is that if people feel that they are not being listened to or engaged, then they may represent
there's the ultimate price. Yeah, there's the
in
ultimate
another way.
Price that is paid. Yes.
It ought not to be. It ought not to be ignored. So
I hear you. I hear you, Mr. Johnson. As I said, we will we'll have that. That. You can probably treat with that in another program, but certainly we want to thank you for taking the time to sit with us in this first half hour of the Citizens Community Forum. It's always a pleasure to have you, and we will seek certainly to continue the discussion in this vein, because it's a topic, it's an issue that's not going to go away anytime soon. I'm hearing a lot of things on the ground, and I'm sure that you're also hearing a lot of things on the ground. But thank you so much again for taking the time to share with us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Pleasure, always.
Indeed. Mr. Trevor Johnson there, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, talking with us on the Citizens Community Forum this evening. Our topic, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. Well, in the second half hour coming up, we are also going to revisit an interview that we did with the ECA, that's the Employers Consultative Association, on this very same topic. And we spoke then with the CEO, Ms. Stephanie Fingal, CEO of the Employers Consultative Association, as well as Mr. Kenton Nancoo, Chairman of the ECA, again on this very same topic, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. So we take a short break now and come right back. Be part of the Citizens Community Forum, a place where we bring to light and discuss critical community, social and national issues, discussions on health, leadership, governance, crime, education and social justice.
We might shift from focusing on whole language approaches to focusing on developing phonemic awareness. So we're just teaching phonics, and then the role of comprehension, the vocabulary development, making sure students can visualize when they read. We're not addressing those needs. So you're right.
And as a matter of fact, I don't know, Stephen, if you know this, but there are some places in the States where the legal drinking age is 21 and not 18. Even though there are persons advocating for our age of consent to be dropped back to 16.
You are dealing with developmental stages of learning. Should it start at the primary, secondary? Where should it start?
Very, very good question.
So there are studies that are being done. The thing about it, Mr. Cummings, let's be honest, how many people really sit and read those studies or even, I mean, lots of things are coming in different forms. A lot of the data, a lot of the research is coming in video forms and so on. In our own society, how has research been articulated on this pandemic?
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
Welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. In this second half hour, we are going to talk with the CEO of the Employers Consultative Association, Ms. Stephanie Fingal, as well as the chairman of the ECA, Mr. Kenton Nancoo, on this topic, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. It's an interview that we did some time ago, and we thought it was very instructive to have their perspectives once again. Let's go over now to Mr. Kenton Nancoo and Ms. Stephanie Fingal. Because many times, you know, when you have these matters, industrial relations matters ending up in the court, it's because of a misunderstanding of what the legal provisions are relative to maybe, as we mentioned, contract labor as opposed to permanent, seasonal work and things of that nature. And this is what Her Honor had to say relative to that. And I believe, she was also hinting at that, there's need for some kind of continuous education, public education program, so that persons would know more about, their status of employee within the work environment. Let's just get a listen to Her Honor Deborah Thomas Felix again.
I have noted with interest that the thinking which has been very public lately is the thinking that the industrial court does not allow employers to fire workers. This, in my mind, shows a lack of understanding of the work of the court. From time to time, there are employers who may decide to bring an end to the employment relationship with a worker for one reason or another. To use layman language, the employer fires the worker. These employers would afford the workers the opportunity to be heard. They would allow the worker a fair hearing on the particular issue, and they will also follow the process stipulated by the laws of this country.
Her Honor Deborah Thomas Felix there again, and I see Ms. Fingal has rejoined us. Mr. Nancoo, I'm going to come back to you on that question to give your interpretation, your understanding of what you've just heard there. Ms. Fingal, thank you again for connecting with us. We were talking about where there is an apparent misunderstanding in many on many occasions of the function of the court, that we're talking about the industrial court, and basic worker employer rights, and when you have that sort of disconnect, many issues end up in the industrial court that some people will tell you did not necessarily have to be there. I just wonder if you can respond to that, Ms. Fingal.
Of course, we start off with whether employers are aware, knowledgeable, and have the right advice in handling matters in the workplace. Often you find persons give advice, or they are under-informed or ill-informed, and the process of doing what they have to do is deficient. It's not necessarily in some cases that an employee is not at fault. Often the employee is at fault. But there's something called natural justice, which I'm sure you know about. Yes. And employees have a right. I always remind employers that the criminal who commits murder has his day in court. He has defense, he's able to call witnesses, etc. And there's a parallel when you are dealing with employees in the workplace. If something has gone amiss, that you allow a certain protocol, representation, the right to be heard, etc.
Due process, yes.
Right, due process. And therefore, in the absence of that, often you find employers end up in the court. And as I said, a lot of times it's because for some reason you feel if the person is guilty, then I can make that decision. And that is not the way to go. So we advise employers seek the right advice. You know, sometimes an employer asks for advice and the advice they get is what they want to hear. And as advisors, as consultants to employers, it's important that you explain the risks involved, that you explain to them that there is protocol and you are exposed to litigation if you don't do the right thing and so. And therefore, if you manage it well, if you allow the right to representation, all those things. And of course, timing is everything. You don't keep it 6 months and a year. There are a whole lot of things that go into it. Then you will not find yourself probably losing a case where an employee should really, the services should be terminated because he has done wrong. And sorry.
And you know, there's also the term constructive dismissal. That's something that I believe we can touch on as well, because you know, employers believe that once they have that, you know, for example, you know, an employee may be at fault. You have a verbal, you know, caution, and then you follow that up with a letter of caution, and then another one, and then another one, and then if that you know, behavior persists, there's then, you know, you take it to the next level. So that I hear you on the process, you know, which a lot of employers you know, utilize as well.
Yes, so constructive dismissal generally would be where there's a breach of contract. And you would find another thing would come back to dialogue. An employee who is asking for some sort of, you know, assistance or some of reprieve is saying, listen, these things are not working out the way they should. My contract is being breached. You're asking me to do something that I shouldn't be doing, etc.
Yes.
That importance of having that dialogue with that worker, perhaps you might be able to resolve it. But where you decide unilaterally again to do something contrary to the terms and conditions of that contract, or you totally ignore the employee's call for some attention, there's a grievance, you find the employee may then decide, I have no way to go, or I feel threatened because I'm not getting the kind of response that I need, and I'm perhaps thinking I might lose my job. So he or she may resign and then claim constructive dismissal. Critical in that, when an employee makes that decision, again, it's calling that employee, finding out really, okay, we might not have addressed it properly, but let's talk. What's the issue? And we come right back to where we started.
Yes.
Relationship, dialogue. Because remember, an employer and employer are two human beings. And that's why I was saying earlier on, we are in a new space, a new way where it's not the hard and fast, I am the boss, or I am the employee and have my right. There is need for that rapport together now. We have to mature to that new level.
It does not
resolving
always
issues.
It does not always have to be adversarial. Let me go back to Ms. Nancoo and that very same question that we are discussing now. I also see that there is a clear need for continuous public education on this business of employer rights, worker rights, in you know, in the workplace, Mr. Nancoo.
Yeah. Just to back up on the clip that you played relative to Her Honor, making reference to some of the challenges that the court has been experiencing in terms of the quality of representation on both sides. And this is something that has not emerged now. As a practitioner myself, we have been seeing this, you know, over the last decade, where the quality of representation, you have people who don't understand how to write or to report, what goes into reporting a trade dispute.
And you know, Mr. Nancoo, you're going, and I will allow you to develop that point, but I see you're going into an area that you know, the labor unions are very, very sensitive. It's a very sensitive area.
To be quite honest, Stephen, we have discussed this. I have discussed this on many occasions. That's where I came from. I came from the bowels of the trade union movement.
You're on safe ground. You're on safe ground.
I'm on safe ground, and I can take you back to when I always use a reference when Cipriani Labour College, Wilbert Winchester, God rest his soul, on Marval Road. That turned out the focus of the quality of talent that you had coming out of the Cipriani Labour College back then. You know, you're not seeing that kind of talent. Even the trade union leaders, they have said to me on many occasions, Keston, we need to really spend some time. I cannot even get an officer to understand, you know, to write a proper statement of case and all that. So that is showing itself, which has resulted in the comment that Her Honor made as it relates to, you know, how matters are being presented and all that. So don't worry, Stephen, they're my comrades. Yeah.
Some people like who would see this as an indictment on the trade union movement. I'm not, you know, calling names. You know, Ms. Fingal, let me bring you in here.
Well, I would want to say, you know, industrial relations is not for the faint-hearted. Let's say that. It is also, it is also not something that you can gloss over. If you're doing a matter well, it takes time. You have to plan your investigation. You have to do your reports. One of the things about industrial relations is writing. You talked earlier about first warning, second warning, and all those things. Key take is because people don't want to write. And you find that they may talk and talk. But really, if you are doing the job and taking it seriously as a unionist, as an employer, but we are employers, so we talk about employers, you have to spend the time to analyze. It is not just a simple matter. You have to analyze. You have to know your company's procedures. You have to know the law. You have to understand your collective bargaining, conventions. You have to read court judgments. You have to look at the precedent you have set in your organization before. The employee's contract, what does it say? And there are many elements in handling an industrial relations matter. Even from the time you start recruitment, we now have the Equal Opportunity Act and things like that. You have to know what you're doing. And therefore, the human resources and industrial relations practitioners have a lot of work to do.
Yes, indeed.
Union people on the other side, when they want to make a claim against a company, they also have work to do. They have to present the particulars of their case. They must understand what the Industrial Relations Act says about how you do that.
You know,
and therefore, there is that requirement, which perhaps over the past few years, there has been a lethargy among those who are practicing to do the full job, or to do it, you know, take the time to do everything.
You know, it's interesting that we're discussing this, you know, matter this time, and we have just celebrated Labor Day, albeit you know, in a different format. Usually, traditionally, you know, we are accustomed to the large crowds and you know, the placarding and what have you. I had a discussion with some members of the labor movement. I think it was a few days ago, and there's this concern of what they see as an apparent conspiracy against the trade union movement. And we can reference a number of scenarios. We don't want to get into the issue of Petrotrin. We don't want to get into the issue of you know, previous negotiations that are still, you know, on the table, that never really came you know, to fruition. They can tell you that you know, workers are being owed for since, you know, maybe 5-10 years, and they're working, as a matter of fact, in 2021 on a 2019 and a 2017 you know, salary. But be that as it may, is there, you know, do you feel that there is merit, Mr. Nancoo, in that that view that there's some apparent conspiracy against trade unions? I might be putting you on the spot, but
no. As I said, I'm a trade unionist. I came from the bowels of the trade union movement, so I speak openly with the guys. No, Stephen, I would not use a strong word as conspiracy. I would say that some of the matters that are before us, there is validity in it, okay? outstanding wage negotiations, and all the rest of it. But what has happened is that COVID-19 pandemic has come now and created an environment where the country, the money that would normally have gone in that direction, one has to now get into prioritizing how we should spend this and on what, that kind of thing. So this is why I wouldn't say that, it's what I would like to say and suggest is that my comrades, and I have said this to them before, this time requires leadership, futuristic leadership.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
The new member of the trade union, okay, the millennials and you name it. When you look at the demographics, I've said this to them, guys, are you thinking about how do you get into the minds of
the younger ones?
The younger ones.
Yeah.
They are not going to, do you believe that they're going to be walking the streets, the pavement with a placard saying, hold the fort for we are coming?
Yes.
And this is not a criticism. This is primarily to say to them, hey, guys, you all need to start thinking about making that mindset shift that will continue to keep this very powerful movement, because it's necessary.
Yes.
When
representation, yes.
Yeah, when you look at what, go back to the founding fathers and so on, I mean, that kind of sacrifice, we cannot, or we ought not to leave that, just put that behind us. That is something should inspire and motivate us, not just on Labor Day, but that should flow throughout whatever we do, our thinking and how we act and how we behave. Okay. But I think that, that is something that it really calls for, futuristic.
A shift in mindset.
A shift in mindset,
Yes. All right. And you're listening to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. We are discussing this evening job security, employer worker rights, and I have with me two officials from the ECA, that's the Employers Consultative Association, Mr. Nancoo and Ms. Fingal, both chatting with me on the Citizens Community Forum this evening. Mr. Nancoo, it's I think it's important. I don't want to end the program without treating with this issue of vaccination. And I know we referenced it a little earlier on. And I'm going to allow you to start the discussion, open up the discussion in that vein. We've been hearing so many different things, even from our public officials. There's also, social media has gone, in so many different directions. There is the for vaccination and there is the against vaccination. What is the position of the ECA on this business of vaccination?
Okay, so we did a release, and that release is on the 15th of June, where amongst other things, we indicated in the first instance, the ECA's position on the subject is that making vaccination mandatory in our jurisdiction must be well researched and must ensure that inputs from stakeholders at all levels of society, government, business, labor, and civil society are taken on board before any policy decision is declared or legislation enacted. Just to take that a step further, to engage. There's so many schools of thought. Keep in mind this pandemic and how we treat with it. We got to make up. There's no opportunity for us to say, well, go back to page so-and-so, go back to this precedent. You've got to, we are making it up as we go along.
Yes.
And this is why you mentioned about rights of employers and workers. And how this is why it's so important. Again, we go back to using the words collaboration and consultation. Now, in various jurisdictions, you are in fact hearing, yes, there is a consideration, but I've not heard in any jurisdiction just yet where the government has said, we are going to make it mandatory. Now, there are laws in the Constitution of Barbados and Grenada and
there are provisions,
provisions through the health
under the health public health
under the public health regulation. Yeah, and I think what I believe is going to happen in our jurisdiction, since we are going to be influenced by, you know, who strikes the iron first, you know, to inform and to shape the thinking and where we go with it. My view, my take on it is that in the first instance, there is going to be moral suasion, the use of moral suasion, as far as is humanly possible.
Okay.
Where that does not work, and it's still a hazard, it still creates challenges for the government and the people. Quite naturally, let me hasten to add, we talk a lot about, a lot of the conversations now speak to reasonableness.
Yes.
And recognizing that the individual has rights. You know, there are exceptions that one has to consider, exceptions for religious reasons,
medical and otherwise.
Medical and otherwise. You know, so out of an abundance of caution, I think before bringing down the hammer, it is useful for parties to come together, have that engage in social dialogue before we get to that mandatory.
Yes, mandatory, yeah. Okay.
Yeah?
Mr. Nancoo, I'll come back to you in a short. Let me just bring back in Ms. Fingal here. Ms. Fingal, there is that argument as well that on the question of vaccination, if someone is not vaccinated, and that person is in circulation, you know, together with persons who are vaccinated, so that you have the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated, there's the argument that the unvaccinated would indeed, you know, present a clear and present danger to public health and public safety, maybe even national security. I want you to address that question as well, and of course, you know, your view and your position on, you know, this whole business of vaccination in a general sense.
Yes, so of course, we have no legislation in Trinidad yet, I do not know if it will come, saying yet, because as Mr. Nancoo was saying, in certain jurisdictions outside of Trinidad and Tobago, vaccination became mandatory, like in Italy, for healthcare workers and caregivers. But the government didn't go as far as to say for everyone. And therefore, in our jurisdiction, we also, as I said earlier, we have to look at global trends. We need to include medical doctors. We need to include, you said, civil society, and so even employees, people who might be compromised, immunocompromised persons, to really get a deep dive into what it means to say it must be mandatory. Someone who is unvaccinated in the workplace, as we have been doing in our organization, for instance, we haven't had the vaccines for how long? You wear your masks, you sanitize, you keep your social distance, physical distance, and so. And therefore, that, I believe, will continue if it is you're unvaccinated for whatever reason. The question arises as to if you are unvaccinated, not simply because you don't want to be vaccinated, but you have a genuine reason, a medical reason or something, then what happens to that individual? Is it that the vaccinated people are now saying, then he cannot work with us, his services must be terminated? Will he then become unable to work anywhere if everywhere else said you must be vaccinated? And in Trinidad and Tobago, we also have the issue of having the vaccine. So how soon do you consider those things if everyone cannot have the vaccine at the right time? Will people then be unemployable? You know, and all of those things have to be considered, which I believe we will discuss in time to come. Because let's not forget, this is COVID-19. We hear talk all the time about more viruses. We don't know if another one can come, another pandemic. So we need to carefully consider that. And it will be a way of life in the workplace where, I mentioned earlier,
we're going to have to live with the virus, you know, as we
have to learn to live with
it. Virus.
But the conversation could go on and on. There's a lot more to go into. And really for employees now, I think Mr. Nancoo mentioned moral suasion, but education is key.
All right.
You see,
Mr. Nancoo,
Stephen,
yes.
there is what is called the duty of care. Now, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Act.
Yes.
While the OSH Act does not speak specifically to biological hazards,
As
such
in the
as
case of COVID-19.
COVID-19,
Yes.
this general duty of care within the meaning of the Act, its interpretation and application of care identified under Section 6 is sufficient, or maybe, I will say maybe sufficient, to encompass the COVID-19 pandemic. You see, this principle of duty of care in relation to safety and health has also been underscored in judgments delivered by the Industrial Court. In fact, the provision of a safe and healthy work environment is considered a fundamental condition of the contract of employment, and above all is considered good IR practice.
Right.
And I put that on the table because just to reinforce that, I mean, this thing is so fluid.
Yes, it is. It is.
You know, and this is why just before the program, I got a call from another president of a union saying, hey, Kenton, this thing, I've been reading up a lot on it. And, you know, we really need, as Stephanie said, it's education.
You need
identifying that is compelling with messages that can persuade and convince and inspire people before we get there.
You see, there is a strong argument, Mr. Nancoo, on both sides. There are very strong arguments. Whether you're for vaccination or you're not for vaccination, the very people will tell you, okay, why do you want to force me to be vaccinated? You know, I have my own personal human rights issue and other people tell you, well, if you're not vaccinated, you in fact, present a clear and present danger to public safety. So these are things that I believe we'll have to sit very, very, and look at very, very carefully. Whereas you don't want to go the way of infringing on people's rights, but at the same time, there is also a right to public safety. So the discussion is a very fluid one as well.
Yeah, let me just, to your point, Stephen, let me just read this bit for you. The OSH Act. It shall be the duty of every employee while at work, A, to take reasonable care of the safety and health of himself and of other persons who may be affected by his acts or omission at work. B, as regards any duty or requirement imposed on his employer to cooperate with him so far as necessary to ensure that that duty or requirement is performed or complied with. One can therefore argue that a safe system of work requires an environment that does not unnecessarily expose persons to possible COVID-19 infection without adequate protection.
All right.
So,
yeah, interesting points there, Mr. Nancoo.
I mean, it's that's their point, that there are arguments on both sides.
Yes, they are. They are. So in this regard, Mr. Nancoo and Ms. Fingal, if it happens that the government intends or would want to move in the direction of making vaccination mandatory, and I wanted to just spend a little time on this business of vaccination. There is a position or there are recommendations that the ECA would put forward, would there?
Absolutely.
Definitely. Certainly.
Right.
Yeah. Because we trust that it's going to be a whole part of a tripartite conversation. Employer, the government, which is the largest employer, business, so tripartite plus even
civil society,
civil society and so on. And this is why we are, at this point in time, we are staying with, let's get the research done. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's understand that, we ought to be driven and motivated, that we are all in this together. Yeah. Because back to your point that the topic, job security, we need to create a circular flow So in order to have job security, we need people to be vaccinated so that the
They can be
workplace,
secure. Yes.
right, the
And secure
workplace,
others.
an opening of the economy and so on by ensuring that people are vaccinated and so on. That circular flow of money is going to contribute in one way or in many ways to job security.
Yes.
You know, and that,
Indeed. Okay. I take that as your closing. Ms. Fingal, you know, your closing remarks.
Yes. So I just wanted to add to what Mr. Nancoo said, in that we have started utilizing an e-learning platform developed with the ILO. So we did that last year in the midst of the pandemic, and that's what we are using now for our Industrial Relations Academy. And we hope that academy becomes ready. It's EduQual, an international accredited organization. So there's a certificate coming from EduQual for our programs. Okay. And we really hope, I mentioned earlier, we think that there is a gap in the learning and understanding and the way IR is done. And we are hoping to really, you know, have so many more persons come and learn as so that that gap is filled, that we don't have a mire of, you know, unskilled people, because we need industrial relations will not go away. We need that. Yes. The other thing is that we are going to be engaging in a business resilience training, which we believe we did something last year in business continuity. But one of the key things about businesses and for job security is for a business to be resilient.
Yes, indeed.
And we are going to be focusing not just on the industrial relations, but soon to come on business resilience. If we get our members with resilient businesses and understanding how to stay resilient, we will be able to help secure jobs, to maintain profitability for our members, and really help the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's really our end objective. Whatever we do, it doesn't end with the association, but it goes for the benefit of the entire country.
All right.
And you know, Stephen, permit me, if you'd permit me, you know, the listeners to your program, and I have no doubt from participating here this evening, I mean, it's so enriching and rewarding,
yes,
you know, that your listeners, they can, in fact, the ECA, I mean, is proven and tested. The quality of work that we do,
yes,
you know, is proven and tested. So that I'm saying that to make the point that should there be, you know, feel free, you know, go on our website, call us, you know, we are the professionals, the true professionals in industrial relations. We live it and we do it.
I'm sure that you know, our listeners and our viewers would take you up on that, Mr. Nancoo. Mr. Nancoo, Mrs. Fingal, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us inside the Citizens Community Forum. It has really been a pleasure, enlightening, informative, engaging, educational, in so many different respects. And I get the sense that we may have to continue the discussion at a future time.
Please, please, tomorrow if you wish.
Again, thank you both for joining us on the Citizens Community Forum, and we certainly will be talking with you again. Thanks.
Yeah, it's indeed our pleasure.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
It's been really our pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
That's it for the Citizens Community Forum this evening. I'm Stephen Cummings. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and until next Wednesday for another program. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.